Hello and welcome back to a new video. First, I just wanted to say thank you for 100 subscribers. It was so sudden and it really does mean a lot, so thank you. But yeah, today I'm going to be doing a fantasy city lightbox. The creative ideas weren't really coming to me this week, so I made a poll on my Instagram to give me some ideas, and surprisingly the majority voted for an original design, and I honestly thought Hollow Knight would win and I could just copy a picture and have it easy, but that didn't happen, so I had to actually use my brain and try to come up with something cool. So I sat down to sketch and hopefully get some ideas going, but it wasn't really working. I drew like a weird bridge coming out of a forest, but it didn't feel right, so I just kept doodling, and I drew a little desert scene, and then I just started on like a tree, but it just wasn't really working at all, and I wasn't feeling any of them, and I was really blanking on ideas, so I went back on Instagram and I looked at one of my favorite accounts on there in hopes of finding some inspiration. The account is Fantasy Worldscapes, and they have a bunch of super beautiful fantasy artwork of mostly city scenes, so go check them out, After scrolling a bit, inspiration finally struck, and I knew I wanted to do a city scene, so I got back to the drawing board and I decided to combine my desert and city idea to create a desert city. For the composition, I went for the classic character standing in the foreground overlooking the scenery, which is a pretty reliable layout for lightboxes, and I just drew what came to me, and yeah. There were some elements that I knew I wanted, like a giant tower and walls and some super distant mountains, but the rest was pretty much up in the air. I really wanted it to look like it was a completely different world, so I decided to make the city be on the edge of this humongous canyon and have a bridge across, and I really liked the interest that it added. Then I really liked the idea of making my little character a robot who's a traveler of sorts, who's been venturing through the vast desert and finally came upon this grand city. So I settled with this sketch, and it was time to start with the layers. I started simple, and the first layer I did was in the very back because it was the easiest, and I drew the planet into the sky, but it could be a sun or a moon, depends what you want, but I like to think it's a planet. I kept it simple for the back layers because they're just distant sand dunes, so they don't need much details. As I kept moving forward, I started adding more bumps and mountainous shapes on the left side because that's where I wanted the main mountain chain to be. This is a harsh landscape, so I made the mountains very jagged and pointy to give it an unfriendly and dangerous feel. After a couple more layers of just building up the mountain, I had to start thinking about the canyon part. My plan was to have it start behind the city and wrap around to the foreground so that the city looks like it's on an isolated bit of cliff, so I had to start the canyon way in the back. And after a bit, I got bored of that and started working on the main cliffs area that's around the middle of the lightbox. I kept my sketch in mind, but I mostly just eyeballed it. I love how dramatic this cliff ends up, but you'll see that all in the end. Also, on this layer is the very back wall of the city. I feel like it's hard to explain how I did this city the way I did, so hopefully the visuals are good enough for you to understand, but I basically just had to think in layers and how I wanted the wall to come forward with each layer and things like that, so I did sections of wall with sections of city on each layer, so it would be very dimensional. And the buildings, I feel like it kind of failed a little bit. I wanted them to look futuristic, but they were small and the details ended up looking too big. And overall, I just think the little buildings were kind of a fail. I added some rounded towers just to spice it up a bit and to tie in the big tower that will come later. Most of these layers are the same. On one side, building up the cliffs, and on the other side, the city. I was kind of doubting myself because if you just look at these layers, they look so disjointed and weird, but I kept going and trusting the process because I hoped that it would all come together and it would be good. And suddenly I was almost at the halfway point where the wall will start curving back, so that was where I wanted my tower. I had a pretty clear design and story for this, a super tall tower with big domed roof and a balcony. Since this grand city is so isolated in a desert, travel by foot is pretty rare, so the main way of transport and trade is by sky. So this giant tower was built by the robots in the city in order to make it easy to spot and to land flying machines there. There is a bridge across the chasm that leads into the harsh wastelands, but few travel that road, so the gates are always shut. Anyways, speaking of bridges, this layer has the bridge and gates. I also feel like I failed a little bit at the bridge. It looks very plain and simple, and I just couldn't think of a cool design, so this ended up being it. I wish I could have come up with something, but I just didn't have it in me at the moment. Then I just did more and more layers to close up the city, finishing the walls, adding more rock details here and there, and generally opening up the canyon a lot. I wanted it to look vast and epic, so I didn't want to crowd it with too many little rocks and buildings and stuff. And once it was done, I actually really liked it. The city looked good, and I'm glad everything came together, and it was worth it to trust the process in this. And now it was time for the foreground. I wanted my robot character to be standing high up in some mountains looking at his travel destination. I imagined he is a simple merchant traveling and selling his goods to make ends meet. He heard about the glamorous oasis city in the wastelands and thought he would strike out and attempt the long journey to hopefully have a better future. But unfortunately, a sandstorm ripped away his stuff and he got lost, and after weeks and weeks of wandering around, he finally stumbled upon the city. And that's my story for this little robot. His design was kind of generic, but my mind still wasn't as creative as it could have been, so this was it. Then for some extra details, I added some hot air balloons and a dirigible so that the city looks like it's buzzing with life. Then I just found out the placement of everything and glued them in place. And then it was time to assemble, and this took so long because there were so many layers. There were 21 layers, so it just took a really long time and a lot of foam board. And honestly, when I was doing it, I didn't like how it was turning out. I thought it looked weird and stupid, and I don't know, I just didn't like it a lot, but I kept going because I wanted to finish. And after that was done, I got a box and I got the LEDs in the back, and it was done, and I really actually like it a lot. I think this greenish light makes it look really cool and post-apocalyptic almost, and I just really like it overall, even though I didn't earlier, but yeah. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and follow for more light boxes. Comment below any other ideas you might have, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!